Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's one of the big ones. I'm going to be talking about the newest album from Marianas Trench, titled Astoria. This is one of the big ones, folks. This is one of the albums I've been looking forward to all year, from a Canadian pop rock act that's been quiet for way too long. A group that might have started off with a debut that seemed to come at the tail end of the commercial boom for pop rock, before quietly becoming an absolute powerhouse up here in Canada with hit after hit after hit. A group that for no adequately explained reason has ever crossed over to the US, even despite having irrepressibly catchy songs, solid production, excellent songwriting, and one hell of a frontman. So why the hell is that happening? Honestly, I'm not sure. I'd argue a big part of that initially was distribution. The band's star-making, damn near classic record, the pop rock masterpiece Theater, didn't hit the United States until September 2010, over 18 months after it was released in Canada. And while we couldn't get enough of them across 2011 and 2012 and even 2013 with the excellent record Ever After, the US charts were in a profound state of turbulence in the collapse of the club boom, so I'm not exactly blaming them here. Thankfully, Marianas Trench got that settled through a deal with Cherry Tree and Interscope for some distribution in the States, but I think a bigger part of it now is that Marianas Trench are a much different sort of pop rock act, taking much of Fall Out Boy's theatrical ambitions and writing and marrying it to a far more lean and melodic sound, trading in the obnoxiousness for populist cleverness. By their second album, they had built a three-act structure for a loose conceptual framework. By their third album, they embraced all-out narrative storytelling. And after the EP Something Old Something New that dropped earlier this year, that contains satirical tracks like Pop 101, one could argue that Josh Ramsey's writing was in danger of disappearing up his own ass. But I wouldn't quite agree here, and when I heard the loose conceptual framework behind their upcoming album Astoria, instrumentally inspired by 80s fantasy and adventure films, I realized we might have something so damn earnest that it transcends irony or satire and just becomes flat out epic. And that's not a word that I will ever use lightly. So you can bet I was really excited to hear Astoria. Does it live up to my expectations? Well, folks, this album is pure, concentrated, wonderful. I reviewed a lot of genuinely great albums this year that took a bit to grow on me, but this slice of pure new wave pop rock hit me immediately, and I haven't been able to break free. Eclectic yet refined, ridiculously clever, yet anchored in a powerfully heartfelt lead performance that shows Josh Ramsey delving into even more personal material with one of the most elastic and potent voices in modern pop. And sure, it's self-referential, it's theatrical, and loaded with little interludes that allows Ramsey to draw on the formula that Spielberg and John Williams perfected in those movies, but also gets how to make those pieces work in a pop context. Man, it's been a long wait for this album, about 4 years, but I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have this record because it is goddamn fantastic. But you know what? I can tell there'll be a fair few people who might initially be put off by how few obvious rock elements there are on this album. Marianas Trench have been on the path towards pure pop music for a while. This is probably the album where the rock is the most qualified. The easiest analog might be a pop musical with cinematic ambitions, and one with an orchestra of horns and strings, with more of the melodies anchored to soaring keyboards and the rubbery elastic guitar lines. Oh, those guitars are still there. Marianas Trench aren't surrendering the tightness and roaring swell that gives their song such huge presence, but on first listen, I can see why many would see this as the slickest, most polished record that they've ever released. Of course, when you dig into the subject matter, you realize that's far from that simple, but it's much more indicative of the melodic subtleties. I mean, I could go on and on about how the 5 instrumental interludes damn near perfectly encapsulate how a subtle instrumental chord shift and really grab at the heartstrings and not let go, or how the razor-type drum work shows exactly how you can have prominent percussion without overshadowing the melody, or how the synth choices and the groove show exactly how you can make a record clearly calling back to the new wave of the 80s while still sounding impressively modern and undeniably Marianas Trench. And then there's the individual songs that take Ramsey's killer melodic compositions and inflate them into distinctly textured entities, like the razor-sharp new wave of Burnin' Up, to the cowbell and chunky guitars on Yesterday, to the island-inspired percussion on Who Do You Love that still anchors itself in the guitars to that fantastic crescendo on Wildfire. And then there's the heartbreaking piano line of One Love that calls back to Fallout and Beside You, some of their best piano ballads, or the piano rock of Shut Up and Kiss Me that reminds me more than a little bit of the best parts of Stutter. Really, there are so many callbacks to previous Marianas Trench songs all over this record, but that's not even counting the 4 distinctive instrumental shifts on the opening title track, and they all kick ass, or the perfectly elegant and powerful reprise of End of an Era. Hell, I gotta be honest, I'm struggling to find points instrumentally to criticize on this album, but if I were to stretch, I'd say I didn't quite love the buzzier tone on This Means War in the synth line, or that cascade against the hi-hats on the chorus of Wildfire While We're Young, but really both songs still stand out as great songs. But really, I can sum up the melodic skill and power of this album by the fact that there is a stripped-back ukulele track, Dearly Departed, with hints of ghostly strings that doesn't manage to come across as cliched. If you're a longtime fan of Marianas Trench, the bridge will hit you like a ton of bricks. I didn't think it was possible anymore to make a stripped-back ukulele pop song resonate as more than just hackery anymore, but Josh Ramsay, he pulled it off, and that's incredible to me. And that's mostly because he delivers a virtuoso vocal performance all across this album that pulls him all over the place, from the rough-edged screams for which he's well known to a ridiculously solid falsetto to his lower, more subtly emotive range where he shows that he doesn't need to rely on the multi-track harmonies to land a real emotive punch. He can still be a very intimate performer. Of course, all those vocal harmonies are still here as well, and they're brilliantly arranged glory. And combined with some of the more meaty guitar progressions that show up, and outright lyrical references draw more than a few links to Queen, more specifically circa the era of Highlander. And though Ramsay is playing things a lot closer to the chest than the epic world-bending sprawl of that movie, he proves that with this album, if they wanted to bring back the bigger riffs, go even more theatrical, go even more epic, they could pull that off, and very few bands could say that. Now, I mentioned that 80s fantasy and adventure movies, they do play in the instrumental character of this album, and on first listen, I was trying to dig into where they would creep into the lyrics, and they do, but in a much subtler way than I initially expected. Because here's the trick. The self-deprecation, the outsized personality, the emo-tinged lyrics that have been Mariana Trench's hallmark, they're all still here. But there's a loosely defined narrative centering around growing up and maturity. You don't typically see that in emo. Rising above losing a great love to move on with one's life to whatever possibilities might come next, be they infinite. And Ramsay channels at his lowest points quite plainly into the writing on this album. The girl he loved call off the engagement. His mother suffers from Lewy body dementia, which is really a horrid disease. And he himself spent time in the hospital alone. Whatever sparked to break free, it had to come from within himself, the sort of underlying narrative that runs through the core of all the great 80s inspirational adventure movies. And what I really appreciate is how Josh Ramsay's not afraid to go not just dark to his own mistakes, hookups to get over this girl, petty jealousy, but the raw grief and pain that underscores songs like One Love with lines like, "What if one's true love's the only one that you're gonna get?" Easy to consider overwrought until placed in the lonelier context that he's trying to convince himself that there is hope for more. He doesn't want to believe there's nobody left for him, because he does rebuild his confidence. He makes peace with himself throughout the course of this album, and then almost on cue, she comes back on Wildfire, and he's faced with the question whether or not he wants to try again. And he realizes if he wants to have any real closure, because he knows that they both really haven't changed that much, he does need to grow up, face the music, own up to his own mistakes, make peace with himself and with her, and then move on. And it's all brought through the masterclass, a superb pop songwriting that never needs to rely on formula or cheap references to make it work. Granted, as I said, there are songs that if you catch the callbacks, they ring all the more powerfully in, especially if you know the context and to whom they were written about. But Marianas Trench are able to close that door on their past with a lot of grace and respect. They are still able to make some damn great songs that you can realize and have emotional power without the callbacks, both for themselves and the audience that they address on the outro stanza that for me rings as almost borderline Shakespearean. If we shadows have offended, I hope your heart can still be mended. I hope you know that I don't blame you, my dear friend, always will love you still, but Astoria must end. Folks, when I went into Astoria, I expected it to be good. I've liked Marianas Trench for years now. They're one of the few pop rock bands to have survived the end of the pop rock boom and have only gotten stronger for it. But I wasn't prepared for Astoria to get me like it did. The writing is plain spoken, yet all the stronger for it. The melodies are ridiculously good. The production is gorgeous. And Josh Ramsay, he gives the best vocal performance of his entire career. Do I wish it rocked a little bit harder? Well, yeah, a little bit. But positioning a record with this sort of cinematic swell and still managing to have that melodic, hard-hitting grooves is goddamn incredible. And if you can't tell, this album is a very strong 9 out of 10 and the highest of my recommendations. This is easily one of the best pop albums of the year. No, not just that. One of the best albums of the year and another high point in Mariana Trench's discography. As I said, this album is pure, concentrated, wonderful. And they've been solely a Canadian treasure for far too goddamn long. Folks, I don't often treat you follow me up here, but let's make Marianas Trench a hit. By this point, they deserve it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming up that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.